Okay, sorry for all the chaos. That was kind of fun. A couple questions real quick. Yes.
Yesterday, there were reports of holdouts that were moderates, that were conservatives.
Shh.
Today, there were only two opponents who voted against it. So how did you get all these holdouts to no to yes?
Yeah, so the question, you didn't hear it, it's kind of loud in here. The question was, how did we get the holdouts to yes? Here's the, so my leadership style is I try to be a servant leader. And as I mentioned earlier, I know what every member of this body, every member of this conference brings to the table. And the leader's job is to bring out everybody's best and get them to their highest and best use, and that takes some time. So what happened procedurally, not to get too deep in the weeds, but we got the Senate modifications to the House bill. Now we're really proud because the big beautiful bill, 85 to 90% of it is the original House product that we ourselves drafted over the course of more than a year. But when we went to the Senate, of course, as the other chamber is apt to do, they made some changes. They sent it over to us. We didn't have it for a lot of time. And so some members wanted to go really deep in the weeds on the changes, and they wanted to fully understand what those amendments were and how they would interact with the rest of the bill and how the administration would administer the new laws. And so there was a process there for a couple of days where we allowed that time for them to explore all that, to talk with leaders in the administration. President Trump was so generous with his time answering questions himself. Vice President J.D. Vance was directly engaged. We had cabinet secretaries at a number of different federal agencies answering questions from members. Some of them even brought their agency attorneys in to get really deep in the weeds on the details. I knew as the leader that we would have to take the time to do that. And so some of that went into late into the night. And I was not going to make anybody, I was not going to demand anybody's vote or their position on the bill until they felt that they had exhausted that opportunity. So we did it, and that's how we got everybody yes.
Yeah. Obviously, you talked about the legislative process. You made a joke on the floor about how the White House legislative team practically lived here in the Capitol. Talk to me a little bit about how you got these members to yes. What concessions were made? We know it wasn't changes in the Senate bill, but it was perhaps maybe promised through executive orders or future legislation. What are we looking at?
No, I mean, look, as I said, a lot of these members wanted to talk with the administration about how the new law would be administered by the Trump administration and the team, and I think they answered those questions. I don't think they exacted a lot of specific commitments or concessions or anything like that. It was just more an understanding how that would interact. As you know, this president has been a bold leader. By last count, he's issued over maybe close to 160 executive orders so far. We're trying to codify as many of those as possible. So a lot of the discussions were about what executive orders will be forthcoming as it relates to the new legislation, and how can we be involved as a House to codify that and do all that in a coordinated fashion. The beauty of unified government is this is exactly how it can work and how it's supposed to work, is that you have an interaction between the executive and the legislative branches, because that's what's best for the people, and that coordination is going to yield great results for the folks. So that was part of the discussion yesterday.
Last question. Speaker, thank you. To follow up on that, some of the holdout members have told us that they understand the president will consider more tariffs on solar and wind as part of the deal, and also that there were assurances about a big issue for your conference, undocumented immigrants and benefits. Can you help us understand what that might look like, how he would limit those benefits?
I literally don't know anything about that. I mean, I wasn't privy to the conversation. So I would tell you there's lots of rumor and conjecture and innuendo that floats around, especially when you got so many people wandering around the building and deliberating over their vote. So I don't know how much stock I'd put into much of that. But all right, last question. Yes, ma'am.
Step back over Louisiana and from the last Rolling Stone, looking at the communities in St. John the Baptist, St. James, whose funding has now been entirely cut off from the IRA's private environmental justice funding. What do you say those from the communities facing more pollution, more exposure from facilities?
Look, I think a lot of the estimations about what this legislation would do in a negative manner to communities in my state or any other are far overblown. I can tell you that this bill is going to be a great thing for everybody around the country, my constituents especially. What's good for Louisiana is good for America. We've got great tax policy here. I think they're going to feel this pretty quickly. Wages will rise. I think household income will go up. I think the job participation rate will increase dramatically. I think unemployment will be low. We're going to duplicate what we did in the first Trump administration. Remember, at the first 2 years, y'all have heard me say 1,000 times, it's objectively true. We had one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, and we're going to do that again, except this time much more comprehensively. We did tax cuts and regulatory reform, and that brought about a resurgence of the U.S. economy. That's what's going to happen here. It's about to happen on steroids. And we can't wait for that to happen. This is jet fuel for the economy, and all boats are going to rise. Thank you all for being here. We got to get a little rest. God bless.
Enjoy your sport.